A very welcome to this meeting, the webinar, which is about um, the wind power planning and permitting index. Before we start, I would inform you just briefly about some basic rules. So this is a public event. The meeting is streamed online at the moment on YouTube. Links are made available also on other social media. So whenever you raise your hand, when you say something, please be aware that in principle everybody can see and hear what you say. I would also request everyone to stay muted until we request you to speak. So if you have any questions to the speakers, then please use the chat window and we can then later call you and ask you also to speak. So with this, I would start now with the presentation, and it will be first the presentation, the first public presentation of the work that we've been doing, and then followed by different experts from the different parts of the world. I'm now sharing my presentation here and hope that that works. So this presentation, of course, takes place on the occasion of the UN Climate Change Conference. Can you see my full screen now?
No, we see your PowerPoint.
Yeah, it is. Okay, just a second. Now it's okay?
No, it's still the same.
Okay. Still? Sean, please tell me if there is anything changing.
No, still the same.
Okay, I'll start this again. Okay, we try this.
Yeah, now it works.
Yeah?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so this is now on the occasion of the UN Climate Change Conference, which takes place these days in in Glasgow. The conference which aims at finding ways to cope with climate change, to find the right ways for climate change mitigation. And there's no doubt that one or the main element is to substitute the fossil fuels that we're using with renewable energy. And it's also very clear that renewable energy, of course, is available in abundance, that wind energy is a major component of that. So we need to accelerate the growth of wind power, of renewable energy in general. But what we've noticed, and many of the panelists here are practitioners, you do this on the ground, it takes quite long to get permission for wind farms, for wind projects in the different parts of the world. So this is the reason why we decided to do a survey amongst different people from our national associations from around the world to measure the performance, the duration of planning and permitting processes in the different parts of the world. So the next slide is not coming. Okay. Okay. So just to give you an idea of where we are, wind power now, we have around 744,000 megawatt of installed capacity worldwide. This is an amazing increase, almost exponential growth we've seen the last 40 years. Wind power contributes at the moment more than 7% to the global electricity demand, but this is of course just the start and we must grow much faster. The last year brought I would say, nice surprise because against expectations of many experts, we saw a new record in spite of the pandemic situation of more than 90,000 megawatts, new installations worldwide, which was mainly, of course, due to one country, mainly due to China. So you see here the leading wind power markets around the world. China accounted last year for more than half of the new added capacity with 52,000 megawatt. You see the United States also had a quite good market performance, and you see Germany, which was for many years the leader, fell a bit back in terms of new installations. I'm very pleased that we have here a representative from India, which is on this list here, which also saw a rather not so strong market growth in 2020. Brazil here, one of the strongest markets last year, Everaldo Feitosa from there, and Italy, also amongst the top 10 countries worldwide, but last year the performance was not as it should be. So, okay, let me see how I can. Okay, so what is the long-term scenario that we see? We expect that wind power will play a really very important role, a cornerstone of the global energy supply. We've made, Jami Hossain, you were one of the main authors of this paper. We made a couple of years back a scenario, a study, and we came to the conclusion that wind power in the long term can and should cover 40 to 50% of the global power supply. Please bear in mind that the power demand worldwide will also grow. So this doesn't mean that we have 7 times the installed capacity of today, but rather maybe 15, 22 times of what we see today. What is the bottleneck? One bottleneck is certainly the planning processes of wind farms. We have made the survey. As I mentioned, we had answers from around 25 countries. We've asked them, what is the duration of the total planning process from the very first idea until the wind farm starts feeding into the grid? And what is the duration of the permitting process? So once you submit the application to the authority which is in charge until you can, the wind farm can start operating. And what we found is that there's a global average of more than 5 years for the whole planning process of a wind farm, and 29 months, more than 2 years, 2.5 years for the permitting, the approval process of a wind farm. This, of course, when we look at these figures, we should bear in mind also that technically the numbers should be much, much less, because just for installing a wind turbine, technically that requires rather months than years. So here we see the planning, the duration of the complete planning processes. You see there is a quite big variety within the countries. Ukraine, Argentina, China, these are countries where also that variety is not so big. The average is the bar in the middle. And you see countries like, for example, Germany, which have an average which is just about above the global average, but there is a very big diversity, so it can take in such countries between less than 2 years and more than 10, maybe even 15 years. So this, of course, shows us there is a big diversity in terms of the total planning processes. And when we look at the time it takes to get an approval for a wind farm, then again, we see a similar picture here. Some countries, Argentina, Ukraine, China, also Pakistan, they do pretty well, but in other countries it just takes a lot of time. It takes sometimes an average 5 years, like in Japan, in Sweden, in Italy, and Israel is, of course, a small market, but that is one of the countries where it takes very, very long. We see here the figures, and you find all these figures in the report that you can download. We circulated with the invitation to this event. We circulated the link to the study, so you have direct access to all this. You see here per country the minimum, the average, and the maximum duration of the planning process, also of the permitting process. We thought that it does not make sense just to look at the average as the main indicator, because if there is a big kind of variability between the minimum, the maximum, and the average, then of course that is not good for the predictability of an investment. Accordingly, we calculated a planning index and we calculated a permitting index, and out of planning and permitting combined, we calculated and came to the wind power planning and permitting index, which gives an idea of how we do assess planning and permitting processes in the countries, in the different countries of the world. So you see here those countries where we have got all the data. This is the ranking. So the fastest, most reliable, predictable process is in Ukraine, Argentina, followed by China, the United States. And you see some countries like, again, here the countries that I've already mentioned, Germany, Japan, Sweden, Italy, Israel, where it takes too long, and there's also quite big kind of variety in the duration of the processes, which again has to be rated in a very negative way. So this index we have now for the first time calculated that. We're publishing for the first time. We're planning to publish this in the next years as well, again to get updated data and see how countries are improving or maybe getting worse in this context. And again, let's not forget what we're talking about. We want to achieve our climate targets. 2030 is an important year. And if it takes more than 5 years to get a wind farm permission approval, then of course that already kind of creates problems to achieve those climate targets. Let me also refer to the recommendations that we have come up with. In general, we believe that it is important to limit the permitting process, that it should not take longer than 12 months, that a decision must be made not longer than 1 year. We know that many administrative units, they are a bit overwhelmed, of course, with the kind of information that they get. This is why we believe a greater standardization of approval procedures will help to shorten the duration, because it's also for the applicants easier then to follow certain standards, and then they know that they can provide the kind of information that is required. It is, and this is something that we also want to underline, important, of course, to have the support, social support for projects, so that there is less kind of disturbance from that side. And that, of course, we believe can be done by maximizing also the economic benefits with municipalities, etc., because that certainly also creates a more positive kind of mindset in that sense, and will also make it just easier to come to positive decisions. Thirdly, we do recommend that every country, not only we on the global level, should set up a monitoring process which assesses the duration of the planning and permitting process on a regular basis, and to identify also where are gaps, where are areas of potential improvements, so that the processes can get shorter in the future instead of longer. Yeah, I thank you very much for your attention. As I said, this is the first time that we have put together these figures on the global basis, and we will do this again in the future, so that we can compare and see how countries have developed. Yeah, with this, thank you very much for your attention from my side so far. And then I would request our next speaker, Davide Astiaso Garcia, who is the Secretary General of the Italian Wind Energy Association. Davide, we saw your country here as well. Please share your views, the specific barriers, challenges that you see from your angle of the Italian Wind Energy Association.
Yes, Stefan, many thanks for inviting me and Anne, the Italian Wind Energy Association, in this very important webinar and to present this very important report, because I think that you had the occasion to write down what are the situation in each country, and the results, the results you obtained are totally in line with what we are saying and proposing to our institutions, decision makers, and government, in order to push towards the energy transition in Italy, that where the main part should be done by wind and PV. So I think, and I hope we will have also the occasion to spread, to disseminate your report at the Italian institutional level, in order to pinpoint what are the data you obtained. So from my side, I can only present very briefly some more information about the situation in Italy. And you have seen in the report of Stefan, Italy is the second worst country, more or less, also in the planning and in the permitting index after Israel. So of course the Italian situation is very different from the Israeli one, that where maybe for more defense reasons they can have a longer times, longer procedures. In our case, we have seen that the time for procedures went down very significantly in the last years, and consequently also the number of the new installed power in our country. As you can see in this graph, after some years of first installation, more or less 20 years ago, we had the constant growth of the wind energy sector in Italy with new installed power of about 1 gigawatt per year. And then from the 2013 until now, we have a sector impasse where the installation were much lower than the previous years. If we compare these numbers with the ones reported in our national energy and climate plan, we can see that we have to change the rules. We have to speed up the procedures, otherwise we will not be able to obtain these targets. So very briefly, we have in Italy around 10 gigawatt of wind power installed. We have to reach at least 20 gigawatt in the next 9 years, at least, because we are also increasing the targets from the National Energy and Climate Plan. And of course, that means that we have to install new wind farms, and we have to repower the one already installed. More of them are close to the end of life. So we have these two main challenges. What's the main problem? What's the reason why we decrease the number of installation per year? More or less is the one you pointed out in our study, in your report. That means that we had, as you can see in the picture here, a number of megawatt authorized for each 3-year period, that decrease of around 76% compared the 3 years from 2012, 2014 until then last 3 years, 18, 20. Why we had this decrease? Mainly for the constant denials from our superintendencies, linked of course to the Ministry of Culture. So of course Italy is considered one of the countries with more restricted rules in terms of environmental, but mainly landscaping constraints. And in any case, it's not possible that we have, as we have been pointed in the last 4 years, we have 0% of authorization on over 9 gigawatt of requests submitted from 2017 until now. So it means that, of course, we have to preserve the landscape. We do not have to authorize each kind of a wind farm project they will receive. But of course, we cannot have on the other side this percentage, that it means that we cannot proceed in this sense. The new government was alerted by us, but not only by us, about this main barrier, and we had some parliamentary speeches from ANEV, and we presented many reports with more detailed data. So we have also to find some to solve some controversies, and also the procedures of the environmental impact assessment should be better synergetically carried out by the Ministry of the Culture with the Ministry of Ecological Transition, that in many cases is positive to the wind power, to the installation of new wind farms. So what are the proposals we are fostering? Very simply, a simplification of the authorization procedures, of course, with the last semplificazione decree, we had some preliminary steps, but they are not sufficient at all for reaching the targets I just mentioned. So we have to continue in this direction with more effective rules, both for new wind farms and from the repowering ones. And we have to solve the conflict at the Prime Ministry office through a new committee that has been organized 6 months ago, more or less. And we still need some auctions that we have assessed that the cost is very, very low compared to the recovery funds. And we need in Italy single technology auction, because we have seen that multi-technology with PV did not work so much, both for the wind, both for PV wind power. The last point is about the use of a small part of the recovery funds for promoting the so-called long-term power purchase agreements with a specific guarantee fund that can help the establishment of this new tool that I think in most of the country, not only in Italy, is very important for helping the wind energy sectors, and not only the wind or the other renewables, to reach the level they should reach in this very challenging energy transition we are dealing with. So more or less that's all from my side. Of course, I'm here for any questions or for more specific data.
Yes, thank you very much, Davide. I think that was very important to hear your contribution. Also, at the moment, not so encouraging. So we will see whether we will have some impact and things can be accelerated. So the main problems in the approval processes. I visited Italy just last week, and I heard that there's also many kind of landscape-related concerns. What would you say? Is it more the people? Is it bureaucracy or general bureaucracy? What is the main problem?
From what we have seen, is not a problem of people, because usually the society and the citizens usually they approve the selection of new wind farms. It's more a matter of the superintendencies that had a very ancient, how to say, mentality, where they are very close to the new. Not only for wind, but the changing of environment, that is something that is related with the human culture, is related with the human industrial activities for any kind of industrial sector, not only for the energy one. So I think they should change this mentality, otherwise it's difficult to get the targets. And we have seen that also when we received the negative answers, negative feedbacks, insights, where the landscape, surrounding landscapes was not under restriction or with some particular cultural or historical heritage or landscaping constraints. That's also important to pinpoint.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the landscape and the perception is a lot kind of something. It's something very not objective. Huh? When you think about it's even part of cultural heritage when you think about old windmills in Spain or in the Netherlands. So I think that is also part of the longer term approach that we that needs to change over the time. Now, thank you so much. Then a great pleasure to have Milan Nitschke here. Milan from SL Naturenergie, which is a typical German medium-sized developer. And Milan, you've been, or your company has been in this sector for many, many years. You've done many projects more on a regional basis in the west of Germany, struggling a bit also with the approval processes, which take now longer, are more complicated. But we look forward to hearing from you, your comments, your views.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to tell you a little bit about what's going on in Germany those days. So when I started in that business, let's say 20, 25 years ago, the big counterpart, or let's say it frankly, the enemy, was huge utilities who wanted to run coal-fired plants and nuclear plants. And I guess it's the same in all energy markets, that first of all, if you enter in a new market with a new technology, you have to fight several battles. Those battles are more or less over now. So the old fights are gone, but new ones appear. And there are still a lot of people, for several reasons, who do not want to have too much wind power generation in their area. And there is one big friend you always have if you want to slow down things, and this is bureaucracy. And to be honest, there is some stereotype which is absolutely true. If it comes to bureaucracy, then the Germans are champions. And in fact, what we have here is, if we start a project, first of all, of course, it's about negotiating contracts with landowners and so on. So you need to secure the space where you want to build up the wind farm. And this may take whatever, a few months, a year, something like that. But this is business. So then it comes to discussions with the municipality where the wind farm shall be built. This is, it appears that this is pretty easy, because people are already used to wind power generation. Municipalities are used to also gain income from wind farms on their space. And then maybe it takes you only 1 year to agree in something that the municipality is supporting. But if they want to do a regular land use plan, and if they want to do everything perfect, and if maybe also they want to extend the timeline a little, then it can take 4, 5, even 6 years until such a land use plan is agreed on. Next is that you request a permission to build your wind farm there. There is a deadline. After 12 months, such permission should be given or rejected. But again, here's some kind of trick, because you may say, oh, sorry, but we do not have too many people employed here, so we cannot do everything in time, so we need an extension. And even before this is done, you can say, no, what you gave us as a permission request is not complete. So you have to add this study and that study and whatever else. So not 12 months is the average, but it's about more than double, I guess. So it can also take whatever, more than 2 years until the decision about giving a permission or not is taken and published. So next is that if such a decision is taken, if it's negative, then the project developer starts a lawsuit against the authority. If it is a positive decision to allow a wind farm to be built, then usually it's local environmental groups, or not local, but national environmental groups, which partly only have been created or built up in order to stop the construction of wind farms. And it's about a lot of people located there who do not want to have such things like turbines in their neighborhood. So such a lawsuit can take between 2 and 4 or 5 years, and you only have security about your investment after it is completely done. So if you count all that together, I don't know where I started with, it should be about something more than 10 years. And the average in our project is about whatever, 8, 9, 10 years or so, from beginning of the planning until starting power generation. So those 10 years, of course, are far too long. If we discuss today to reach targets for 2030, it's more than ridiculous to follow that procedure, because if you start planning of one single wind turbine in Germany, then in 2030 it's not even running. So not to talk about achieving the targets. So what we have to do in Germany, and I guess that's true for most of the countries, and I'm to say it in a cynical way, happy to hear that in Italy you are even slower than we are in Germany. But after all, I guess we agree it's a catastrophe if it takes so long. So we need to speed up, and we need to increase speed by 5 times. So not only volumes of installations, but to get to those installations needs to become much faster. And all of that is just a matter of political will and interest. So luckily, I hope that it's correct to say luckily, we will see later, some years later, but luckily in Germany, a new government will be formed, hopefully before Christmas. And then at least the party that was most famous in Germany for blocking and stopping, but also PV farm construction, will no longer be part of the government. And the new coalition that hopefully will be formed then at least appears to really wanting to speed up permission processes. But as I said, it's not only about permission processes. Okay, if they do not take 2 years anymore, but 1 year would be good. But we have to also reduce all the other parts of the timeline so that we can get to a timeline from beginning of a planning to full construction and starting power generation of 3 years. I guess with that we all could live, maybe even with 3.5 or 4 years or something like that, but not longer. If we wait longer, we will get into a serious crisis. We already see that it's not only a climate crisis, but also an energy price or energy cost crisis. So today we see different electricity prices in the different European countries. And big surprise is not the so-called first mover Germany that invested so much in the past decades in renewable energies that now has the highest electricity prices. But for the moment, it was, example given, France, with a high share of nuclear energy in the electricity market. Just because at the end, the residual price of a kilowatt hour of a gas-fired plant is making the price. And so the more wind energy, the more renewable energy you do have in the grid, the lesser the impact of the of gas-fired plant generation is. So what we see is that when the wind blows in Germany, and we do have much less full hours of wind power generation than other countries, but if the wind blows, we have electricity prices in the market 20 to 30% below the prices in comparable in peer countries. So every wind power plant, every kilowatt hour of renewably generated electricity reduces energy prices, and this is exactly what we need to become sustainable, not only in an environmental manner, but also in an economical manner in our countries. So I very much hope, and I thank WWEA that you just prepared that short study, and I very much hope that in all countries connected here, we will get to shorter permission times and time frames from planning to starting production as much wind electricity as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milan. And yes, indeed, it's an economic question. I mean, it's not only achieving on time, but also we are now, I think, in the race who is going to be the leader in renewable energy. The three big economic blocks of the world. Let me simplify a bit, or 4 economic blocks: China, India in Asia, Europe and North America. They're competing, and obviously some are at the moment performing better than others, and they will have the benefit if they act faster. Now, with this, after having two speakers from Europe, it's my pleasure to invite Jami Hossain, who has been many decades of practical experience from different angles, working for association, but also working for different companies, including planning companies. Jami, we look forward to hearing from you how the situation is in India. India has also ambitious targets, has been one of the first movers in wind energy. But when we look at other countries, it's a bit like, let's say, the German case. Started early and fast, and it's has to see that it is staying in the first group, group of first movers. Jami, I would like to invite you to now present your views from India.
Thank you, Stephen, and welcome all of you to this webinar. And first of all, congratulations, Stephen, for coming up with this report. And it's a very crucial, aspect of not only wind power development, but also, mitigating CO2 carbon. And that, has been discussed in, or is being discussed in Glasgow now. And I have a small presentation where I look at the general issues. And while I go along, I will also talk about India. So there is, the issues are somewhat similar everywhere, but there is diversity in it. But before I get into it, just would like to mention that our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, he has very recently announced that we will have a target of something like 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. So if we assume that at least 40% of that comes from wind, because solar is also strong, and then some could come from hydro and other sources, that means 200 gigawatt of wind power. And at the moment, we have 40 gigawatt of wind power. So over the next 10 years, more or less, we should have a fourfold increase in wind power in India. So that's where this permitting and streamlining the permitting processes becomes very important. I'll try to share my screen here. Okay, so let me go to the first slide. So basically, if you look at the global permitting processes, we have to acknowledge, first of all, that there is great diversity in the time period involved. And there is also some part goes into the permitting process and some part goes into the planning process. And probably a larger component goes into the planning process. But if we look at it, there would be differences in the planning process. There could be differences between, say, Europe, US, India, China, because one of the key elements in planning is that you have to assess the wind speeds. And normally in India, wind farms, before they come up, you have to measure wind speeds for roughly at least 2 years, and at least 2 years. So there could be larger, period measurements, sometimes, even 5-6 years. And these days it has become more important because some changes have been observed in the wind speed patterns, and people are more keen to figure out whether there is a temporal variation in wind speeds. So at least 2 years of wind speed measurements are there, and very little can be done about that. While in countries like Europe and all, there are very good wind atlases developed, because these are many places, these are flat terrains, and the weather models and everything is more, worked out well. It is not so much for larger countries like India and China, where also the weather patterns are also diverse. So This is one thing. And then within a country also, there is a lot of diversity that we have to keep in mind, not only from the point of view of climatic and other issues, but also from the point of view of the administrative areas, because there is a federal structure, and in India every state has its own way. So in some states it can happen very fast, in some other states it can be a little slower. So this was the way. So India and China, in spite of a reasonably high population density, achieve somewhat shorter time. This is interesting, because you see, if you have a high population density, what happens is you have a higher level of urbanization, higher level of residential and other infrastructure on your lands, and plus the land holdings, the ownership of the lands is smaller. So unless you get government lands, which are fairly large stretches, if you go and try to acquire private lands, then even for one wind turbine, just installing one wind turbine, you may have to deal with quite a few number of different owners of wind farm, because the land holdings in India typically are not of the same type as they would be in, for example, Texas. So this is an important aspect, because in the planning, then there is a delay in acquiring land, getting the permission of the landowners, negotiating with them, and there is very little that the government or anybody can do something, because this is between the private party and the people. But I see, interestingly, in your report that Israel and Mongolia take longer period. Now I can understand Israel, because it's again a small country with less land availability. But Mongolia, I think, is a larger stretch of area and a lot of desert areas and all these things. So why it takes so long is something that needs to be thought. And so one way to to address it in the form of a a global output from WWEA, which is applicable internationally, apart from pointing out that in different countries there are different permitting periods which are also diverse. I think there should be some sort of standards in how permitting and permissions are done, which also sort of captures the diversity which is there. So there can be different classes or regions which are classified in that manner. For example, even in any case in wind, we have different classes of wind turbine, different classes of sites, different zones, and accordingly the development takes place. So the need for standardization is important, and these standards can be decided upon different types of sites, depending on LULC, is called land use land cover. So if the land use land cover is more urban, so you will have a one kind of permitting time which will go into it. But if the land use land cover is more of farming areas and things like that, then a different kind of time frame will go into that. Then the environmental class. So some areas are environmentally very sensitive. In fact, some areas where you cannot do anything because of forests, because of wildlife and all that. But then there are other areas which have to be examined for environmental issues, and still there are other areas where no environmental issues are involved. And in India, generally, there is no environmental impact assessment required for the wind farms, because they are considered good environmentally and very least environmental impact. But there may be some areas where there is forests or there are things like that, reserves, where you have to look into the environmental issues. Then terrain is another thing which takes on it all, as far as the planning process is concerned. And the population density that I talked about, the government lands and forest lands. So getting an approval from the government lands can be time consuming, and perhaps it can be streamlined. Forest land generally are very difficult, because a lot of process goes into that. And lastly, the power evacuation, which is the grid. Already some of the speakers have talked about it. And the grid, again, it varies. It's a site specific thing, how far you are from the grid, how much of the transmission line, whether you have the connectivity, and those things. But these things have been understood now very well. And I do not see this as a major block to development of wind farms. So there are load flow studies and things like that which have done. And before actually people get into land acquisition and all, they do get connectivity. So if you are doing a 200 megawatt wind farm or something like that, you know that you can connect it to the grid. So my main sort of recommendations here are that streamlining of the process without compromising on whatever socio-economic considerations are there. So while we all want that the process of development should be taken up very fast, but at the same time we have to keep in mind that these wind turbines are coming up in different areas, and in those areas there might be people living, there might be animals and things like that. While in India, we do not have issues such as landscape and all, but there are some other issues that we have to keep in mind. Because if a wind turbine is set up, it must have some, distance from the boundary of the land ownership. And then it should also have some distance in terms of safety and security, provided, the wind turbine falls due to any reason, and then it should not fall into somebody's land. It should fall within that land which is owned by the wind farm owner, or it should not fall on a road, or it should not fall on somebody's roof, or if the blade flies off. So these are things which have to be examined, and one cannot do away with this completely. This is a problem, and this has to be examined. But once this is done, then there are some other areas where there are delays. For example, just in the administrative approvals, there can be more delays, and that is something that all across the world, not only in India, can be expedited. So let us not have this too much of delay in just moving the papers within the government and getting the approvals. Also, I think these no-go decisions should be taken in a time-bound manner. So there should be, suppose somebody has made an application with a certain department in the government for a certain approval, then there should be a certain time frame within which they must respond and finish it. So this will add to the expeditious, clearance. And also, I would expect that the authorities, government departments, administrative approvals, all the officials involved, all these people are much more proactive. So if they get an application, they should quickly go to the site and see what are the issues, record them, and move it in the process of approval that they have. Another way which can help developers, anywhere, is this, what is called a single window clearance. So the developer doesn't go to a lot of many departments, but has to just go to one department, which will then handle everything internally. So then it becomes easier somewhat for the wind farm owners or developers. So these are mostly the things. And as I said, there should be a standard approach and overall standardization of the process. So if it is an environmental thing, or if it is related to infrastructure or clearance with regard to roads or logistics, whatever, there should be a certain time period within which this should be done. And this is something that WWEA can look at and make a more standard approach for approval of a wind farm, which may be in different areas. So we can think of a absolutely flat, barren lands where there is nothing growing, and how much time it takes to get the approval over there. And then we can think of a forest, or we can think of, say, mangrove areas or something like that. Different kinds of lands, different kinds of things. There will be definitely different kinds of categories of these things which have to be there. Now, coming to India, I think we have not done badly, but in the recent time there has been a delay, but that has not been a delay because of the permitting and all. This is delay more on the side that there was, there was tenders, and then some period goes into signing proper agreements with power purchase agreement and all these things. I think suddenly there will be a lot of capacity which will come up in India, because now that all those things have been sorted out. And, then as somebody said amongst our speakers, that the old, sort of problems are over, but the new ones come up. So I hope that we will be able to do well and are reasonably doing well. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jami. I think that was a very good summary. On the one hand, adding your Indian perspective, but with some more general considerations. And I think you're the first on your recommendation slide, streamlining without compromising socioeconomic considerations. That is certainly can be a good headline for what needs to be done. Standardization, as you mentioned, certainly is something that we need to look into. And I'm grateful because you kind of not only reflected upon the situation that we have, but also started a discussion of what we can do in the time to come. Now, thank you very much. After listening to an Asian perspective, Indian perspective, it's my pleasure to invite Everaldo Feitosa, who is joining us from Brazil. Everaldo, a very good morning to Brazil. Brazil, as we've seen, is now one of the big players, the biggest market in Latin America. Actually, our last physical big meeting we had was with you, Everaldo. You hosted us with the World Wind Energy Conference in November 2019. We know that Brazil is a strong market in the meantime. You personally, after spending also years in science, you are heading a wind farm developer active on the Brazilian wind power market, and we now look forward to hearing your views on the issue of permitting and planning processes. Everaldo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefan. Well, I'm going to first. It's important to mention that today we have nearly 20 gigawatts of installed capacity in Brazil, and this huge market is mainly due to the auctions done by the government, and nowadays I would say more than 70% with private contracts, private PPAs. So we are having a lot of projects, and one important point is that most of the projects are located in the northeast of Brazil, nearly 99%, and all the large consumers are located in the south of Brazil. So we have a kind of big bottleneck on the grid connection. Yeah, but related to the planning process, as Dr. Jami from India has mentioned, a country like Brazil, we have a very critical point in the planning process. There is a requirement of 3 years of wind data measured on the site. So this kind of requirement in which the developer has to install a meteorological tower and later on have a kind of international certification of energy of 3 years. This is something that is very critical. Of course, this kind of standard process is not based on scientific or technical points, because in some of the wind farms, we have very flat terrain, and in very flat terrain, you do not need sometimes to have a wind measurement on the site. You can have some extrapolations, and then you can use also some meteorological simulations and so on. So in the planning side, we have this. So we started already 3 years behind, because we need 3 years of wind data. This is one point. Related to permitting, in permitting, I will divide it in environmental permit, environmental approval, in which most of the states are working very hard in this process. I think we do not have a lot of problems. Yeah, we had some bad wind farms 10 years ago located in dunes in the beach, but not at present stage. So I don't see a lot of problems in environmental approval from the states because this is a local level. But we have at national level a very big critical points related to grid connection. So the electrical infrastructure between south and northeast of Brazil is weak. And in spite of the large amount of projects, so we have at the moment more than 50 gigawatts of projects nearly to be built, we have this kind of critical point on the grid connection. And the scenario, well, the government is working some agencies in order to improve the link with a very strong connection, but this will take 3-4 years to be implemented. So what we see now is some optimization of what we have lacking in terms of space for electrical connection, and not really a problem related to environmental process. Okay, so this is the situation in Brazil.
Yeah, thank you very much, Everaldo. I think it is important that you indeed you raised that point of grid connection, which is in some countries a big issue still, and it is also part of the planning permitting index process. Let me underline that, of course, we are aware that this index now is not, or I want to underline that this index is not a market performance index, because there are other aspects which are important. Of course, the remuneration system, you just mentioned now the PPAs playing a very important role on the Brazilian market. Chami Hossain mentioned from India that was kind of disturbing the market performance when the tenders were introduced. So there are other aspects that are not maybe necessarily directly linked to the planning and permitting process. Yes. So I would say thank you very much to you as well. And then now we have time for questions. Also, if the panelists would like to ask questions to each other, then please feel free also to raise your hand. I see here also, let me also explicitly answer this question. Chami Hossain asking whether the index is is in months. No, that's not the case. We made it in a way that the lower the number is, the better we see the duration and reliability of the country in terms of duration of planning and permitting processes. Yes. Do we have any other comments? Any questions? If this is not the case, then I think this has been a very comprehensive meeting now. We have the first presentation now, the launch of this index, which will hopefully also then motivate some of the decision makers to streamline processes, to standardize, to shorten processes. Let me underline again that it is extremely important to focus on that. We have now, for many of the climate targets, less than 10 years, and wind energy needs to be part of the solution. So we need to accelerate the deployment of wind farms, and it can be done practically. It can be done much faster than 5, 6, or even 10 years. Yeah, I see here the comment. What is the way forward in the initiative? This is now the launch. I think we will certainly next year do a similar survey again. This year, some of the countries were even struggling a bit to provide the data, but some countries have even started small surveys amongst companies. So I'm sure that the data sample will become even better in the next year. And in the meantime, we will also continue our work on identifying what are the factors that are relevant in this process and how can we help as a world association to support governments if they're interested in to streamline the processes and make them faster. And I think, again, let me underline this, as Jami Hossain mentioned it, without compromising socioeconomic aspects, because I think it is clear we hear from some bureaucracies nobody's really pushing them. If we have the people who want to have the wind farms where they live, they will help us to put pressure also on certain bureaucratic entities so that they can proceed faster. Thank you so much. Again, let me mention that this webinar is at the moment streamed online. We will make it available with the different presentations and to be online. You'll find the study on the website of the World Wind Energy Association. And let me mention here again that end of this month, 24th to 26th of November, we will have our 19th World Wind Energy Conference held in virtual format in collaboration with TERI in India. Jami Hossain, you play an important role there as well. There will also be a session on social acceptance as well as on permitting processes. This webinar is also part of a series of webinars on permitting processes. We had one earlier this year with general aspects. We're planning to have another one focusing more on environmental aspects and human health, impact of wind farms on human health and on environmental aspects. Next week, we will have a webinar on, which is also related to the topic here, on the just energy transition. So how can we ensure that the wind sector shares the benefits in a way that makes it the process, the whole energy transformation, in a way that as many people as possible benefit from that. So there is one more question here. Did you figure including onshore and offshore? These figures that we gathered today are for onshore wind turbines, which of course still are the vast majority of the project. It is not for small wind, it is not for offshore wind, this is for onshore wind turbines. Yes, with this, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who supported also the whole process, who provided information, who supported, reviewed the paper that we've published today. And I look forward to staying in touch with you, continuing this process. And we will meet again, certainly latest in a year, to discuss whether there's been made any progress in the sense of accelerating the deployment of wind farms. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good morning. Have a nice evening wherever you are. Stay healthy and see you again.